Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another live. I hope everyone is well. So today, brothers and sisters and friends, we have a very interesting episode and we have a very special guest with us, our beloved Sheikh Dr. Steph Keris. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, brother. Jazakallah khair.
How are you, Dr. Steph?
Alhamdulillah, man. Everything is going well. Alhamdulillah. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, very good, Dr. Steph. So Dr. Steph, just to give everyone a bit of a brief introduction, you are an academic, a professor. You are someone who studied history. Academically, you have also appeared on several Islamic platforms, channels such as Islam Channel, etc. And Dr. Steph, you did something with us recently as well at IRA. You did a whole program for us, which was phenomenal. And it brought a sort of a brand new twist into the Dawah and how we understand the Dawah from a European Western perspective. So Dr. Steph, something I want to discuss with you today, and we can have a discussion about this, and I really want to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, on this channel, I predominantly address atheism. But something recently I've been really looking into is what is the historical background to the advent of atheism? How did we end up in a world which is predominantly turned away from God, has become secular, has become godless? Now, obviously, we live in a world which there's many great things. We have that, development of technology, loads of amenities, progress. But at the same time, we find ourselves in a world which is lacking from the perspective of spirituality, meaning, value, all of these things. So why don't you just take us through a journey of history of how we ended up where we have ended up today?
MashaAllah. Bismillah, salatu wassalam ala Rasulullah. Jazakallah khair. First of all, I would like to thank you and thank your audience who is now listening and watching us, mashallah, being there, because without them we would have a dialogue. So That's nice, mashallah. Let's start with that straight away. And the question is very valid and very important. How did we end up where we have ended up actually? How come that nowadays we have clear secular or laïcistic or laïque, as they call it in French, even societies such as in France, such as in Turkey and in many other places, and Turkey obviously has come now in the news. We all know what has happened in Turkey the last couple of days and weeks, the change of the Hagia Sophia going back to the mosque again. So all this, and that has actually opened again the door to people asking and wondering what is happening exactly, why, and this question is very valid. So first of all, I mean, a massive topic, where do we start, where do we end? But let's simply go back to ancient sources, the ancient Greeks. What about the ancient Greeks? What about the Romans, actually? And I'm not saying it just because I'm Greek, but reality is that the ancient Greeks have left for Europe much more behind than the Romans have. The one thing that we know in Europe, what we have and what we are copying all over Europe, is the Roman law. Mm-hmm. Roman law is without a doubt something that the Romans have left behind, without a doubt something that we have in Europe and the European societies in general. Europe as a whole follows, and the European Union actually is tied to Roman law rather than ancient Greek law, whatever. That's something that the Romans developed. However, anything else, culture related, traditional related, anything else that had to do with environment, whatever, all this has actually originally come from the Greeks, from the ancient Greeks. And the ancient Greek civilization was actually, without a doubt, the womb of European civilization. How do we know about them, actually? Because you might say, yeah, great, fantastic. Now, you see what the Greeks have done, as my compatriots say very often. Look at this, Dr. Steph. Why did you become Muslim? Did you have to become Muslim? We have such a great civilization, such a great culture. And this long before Islam even was Islam. Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. Long before Prophet Muhammad came, long before many other prophets came. No doubt about it. However, the connection to God, they forget totally that, yes, culture, civilization, tradition. China had a wonderful civilization and culture even before Islam. Even the Muslims took many things from the Chinese. India, I mean, the Indians, they brought us the zero. They brought us basically the numerical system, which is nowadays called wrongly Arabic, actually, but the Arabs took over. So, many things without a doubt. And that is exactly what world civilization and world culture is based upon, that we learn from each other. That's one thing. We as people, as humanity, as different cultures, civilizations, and traditions learn from each other. Otherwise, there would be stagnation in the world and we wouldn't have different people, different peoples, different cultures, different religions, different languages, and everything else. So that is one point. Next point, yes, these ancient Greek and Roman sources, where do we get them from? Where did they actually come to Europe? We should not think that they were once there in Europe, Greece and Rome, Italy and whatever, and they were just given through until nowadays. No. What happened in between with the arrival of Christianity, actually, there was clearly a hater towards anything that was classical and ancient, especially towards ancient Greece, but also that had anything that had to do with Rome, ancient Rome. The Orthodox Church, for example, if you look at the Byzantine Empire later, they actually were adamant against anything that was classical or reminded them of the ancient Greek time. So they even wanted to destroy the Parthenon, the Acropolis in Athens. They wanted to do that. That was clearly, that's known. However, if we look at Sultan Mehmed Fatih, 1453, when he entered Istanbul, Constantinople, and later Athens, he forbade of any destruction of any ancient temples, and he himself spoke Greek. His mother was Greek, by the way, originally, as many other mothers were in front before him, of sultans. So the sources that not only the Ottomans respected later, the Greek sources and the ancient sources, but most importantly in Al-Andalus, if we look at the 8th century, 711, Tariq bin Ziyad, a Berber, Muslim Berber coming from North Africa, bringing his army over to the Iberian Peninsula and to Europe and spreading Islam, not to the sword, because the people who were there felt betrayed and felt actually suppressed by the Germanic Gothic rulers there. So they actually willingly, most of them accepted it, embraced Islam and fought with him against the invading Goths. So because of that, Europe, suddenly the Iberian Peninsula up to France, became a Muslim entity, especially the southwestern part of Europe. So Portugal, Spain, Gibraltar, France, these became Muslim parts of the world. And in there, what developed in Europe, something that Europe didn't have before. Suddenly we have academies. Suddenly we have universities. In the 9th century already, we had the first university in Europe. And it was not in Christian Europe. It was not in Italy. It was not in Greece. And it was not in France. But it was in Spain. And that was called Al-Andalus. It was Muslim Spain. And it was Cordoba, the very first university actually in Europe. Whereas the very first university in the world was established by Fatima al-Mahri in North Africa, in Morocco. So if we look at Tunis, in Tunisia, in Kairouan. So basically, if we look at this, we look at the development, it's unbelievable. The development is unbelievable. So academia, the academic world, learning has entered suddenly the European continent. It's something new. And with this learning came also ancient Greek knowledge, came also Roman knowledge, came everything that they got with them from Asia, from India, from China, and so on. And that became part of life suddenly. Our lifestyle in Europe developed, changed suddenly. We had Thomas from Aquinas coming over and studying Al-Andalus. We had Christian clergy, people from the clergy coming over and studying Al-Andalus and going back with the principal understanding of the Tawhid, actually. And suddenly the Protestant Reformation happened. The Protestant Reformation was a revolution against the Catholic Church, which was actually nothing else but eating money of the people and making use and abusing the people who were actually believing in a kind of God. A suppressive, very suppressive regime, actually. And that in the end led to the French Revolution, which led against the state of France, leading a war against religion. And that time, religion in Europe, that meant Christianity. And what was suppressive indeed and kept the Christian Europeans back from learning was not Islam, was not religion, but it was Christianity without a doubt. So they had to get rid of Christianity to come to the point that the Industrial Revolution came, that the revolution of technology and everything that we have nowadays. It had to come to Europe. So it had to be a secular Europe where it has come now, in order to be able to have TV, in order to be able to have cameras, in order to be able to make pictures. We had to get rid of Christianity because it wouldn't have been allowed according to the church clergy. So that's a very general idea of what
very beautiful. Jazakallah khair. You've actually summarized everything so quickly and so efficiently. May Allah bless you. But I'm going to ask you some more specific questions in regards to what you said. Can you quickly move your camera down slightly so we can get more of you in the shot, inshallah? Just maybe ever so slightly. There you go. Perfect. That's perfect. Alhamdulillah.
Yes,
excellent.
Right.
Mashallah. We can see more of you now, mashallah. Alhamdulillah. So Dr. Steph, look, I think something you've highlighted there in what you said is if you juxtapose Christianity with Islam, historically speaking, one thing you're seeing is that Christianity is averse to the Greco-Roman culture. It's averse to reason and rationality. It's averse to free thinking, whereas Islam is pro all of these things, right? And it's because of Christianity's aversion to reason and rationality, to the Greco-Roman culture, we see eventually a rebellion which unfolds and manifests in the form of the French Revolution as one display of this, and then obviously continues through the period of Enlightenment. Because isn't it true that the Enlightenment thinkers, they weren't necessarily averse to God? They would people refer to them as natural theologians, right? That people that would even do the science because they believed in God, and they wanted to understand God through the natural world. So it was more against Christianity. It was a rebellion against Christianity in particular, right?
SubhanAllah, is absolutely that's the point. What can I say more? I mean, you put it right on. That's exactly what the point was. That's what I said before. It was not a revolution against a religion. It was a revolution against a specific religion, against this Christianity that had developed the way it had developed in Europe, which basically was nothing else but Paul's Christianity. Christianity, which was not according to the Bible, was not the Christianity of Isa alayhi salam, of Jesus. May the peace and blessing be upon him. And we know also that Christianity, the way it has developed, suddenly we have a clergy, we have a specific hierarchical position of people who define what Christianity is and what it does, what is not. And we know also that all these religious wars that happened mainly in the Christian world, and I'm not saying that there were no religious wars in the Muslim world in other places, of course there were, misusing and abusing things in the name of religion. But we know that the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, the wars that happened, Protestants against Catholics, that is something that was very strong and really influenced European mindset and European history, and especially this anti-religious establishment later very strongly. And I cannot blame them. I mean, as a European, I would not, before I accepted Islam, I also thought religion is nothing else but opium for the people, right? Somebody said that, right? So, and indeed, again, the one who said that, this quote coming from where it comes from, had an Orthodox background, had a background coming from a Christian Orthodox country, coming from Russia, or at least having connections there, you know? So Europe, Christian Europe, being influenced by Christianity in Christian Europe, it can make you an atheist in the end. If you want technology and if you want to progress, you cannot listen to the clergy, the way the backwards mindset that they had. Absolutely logical. So yeah, that's it. I mean, as you put it exactly.
So Dr. Steph, I want to pick your brains a bit more on the mindset of the Christian church at the time. Say if we go back to around the 14th and the 15th century, prior to the Enlightenment. Now, why was it that they were so averse to reason and rationality towards other cultures and free thinking and the sciences? Why were they so averse to these types of things?
Well, you have to imagine, if you're looking at the 15th century now, let's look into towards the end of the 15th century, the so-called discovery of America, right? The so-called by Christopher Columbus, who happened to arrive somewhere which is called America nowadays. But before him, many others had been there. We know that now. It's not only the Muslims, and not only so many other people have been there already, but none of them claimed to the possession of this country or this continent, the two continents actually. None of them did that. So if we look at the 15th century, a development in Europe in a way that intellectual thinkers and intellectual people in general came to a point to say, in order to develop, and don't forget that was the end of Al-Andalus. So 1492 was basically the last year that Muslims had a state, Granada, mainly the south of Spain, which was still an Islamic part of Europe and of Spain, the only last one. And they were basically chased out of Europe and out of Al-Andalus, out of Spain, and Al-Andalus had to be given to the Catholic invaders, basically coming from the north, and it became what is nowadays Spain and Portugal. On the other side, in the 15th century, we have the Ottoman Empire, which had developed from the 13th, 14th century onwards, actually, and they were coming from Asia, and they were coming into the Balkan Peninsula, moving up to Vienna. Both Muslim empires had something important. They both found knowledge, and the striving for knowledge, libraries, it was an important point. Now, the only people who could read and write in Europe that very time, were actually the clergy again, the church people. Whereas in the whole Muslim world, and this is all proven, I'm not, this is authentic sources, that in the whole Muslim world, as well in Al-Andalus as in the Ottoman Empire, it was anybody who could read and write. There were madrasas, there were the Ottomans had a whole emirate system, which meant within this emirate complex, they had a mosque. Next to the mosque, they had a madrasa. Next to the madrasa, the university. Students were living on the campus of this emirate. Amazing. I mean, if you think of it nowadays, if you told somebody to establish something, they would think, where am I going to find the money from? So an emirate complex, yes, that's the first question, basically. But the emirate complex was a very typical structure in the Ottoman world, and with that emirate complex, they moved on also as well Islamically as dunya-wise. Basically, they moved on because universities that time were not some kind of buildings like they are nowadays, secular buildings where we just get taught specific topics, specific subjects. And we cannot move left and right, and we cannot be a little bit more general. Generalistic knowledge is something that is frowned upon. But that time, generalistic knowledge was the knowledge, and it included also Quran, and it included also the Arabic language, of course, and so on and so on. So the Muslim world was moving towards an education system, or had an education system, which was all-inclusive with the deen, with Islam, whereas the Christian world was moving away from it because Christianity would keep them away from thinking. And you ask me, why would they be so much against thinking? Is there a problem? Yes. If I have to think of the Trinity, I want any Christian to explain to me the Trinity in logical terminology. They cannot. They cannot. Nobody can. So if you have to think of that, it will actually push you away from Christianity if you have to think. So it's better not to think. Just follow what the clergy say. So just follow what they tell you to do. Just give some money to the church and you're fine. Everything is fine.
That's very interesting, because I recently read, I think it was Thomas Aquinas. He observed people like Ibn Sina and the likes, and then he tried to now bridge the gap, as the Muslim world had bridged already, between reason and revelation, but he couldn't do it because of the Trinity, because it's the most fundamental thing to Christianity, and it's illogical. And therefore you can't reconcile reason with that type of tradition.
Yes. Literature, sorry for interrupting you, but if you look at literature, I mean, I'm sure you know Robinson Crusoe, and I'm sure that most of our viewers know Robinson Crusoe, right? Who wrote Robinson Crusoe? Daniel Defoe, right? Who's Daniel Defoe? Nobody. Daniel Defoe is somebody who basically copied Ibn Tufayl. Ibn Tufayl was the person who wrote, there still exists, by the way, in English. The book exists in English, is The Journey of the Soul. Wonderful book, a very nice translation in English, which the origin is, of course, in Arabic, written by Ibn Tufayl with regards to a young boy who has ended up on an island and discovers within 7 different phases of his being, existence on the island, that there is a God. SubhanAllah, he comes through reasoning and logic, he comes to the conclusion, there is a God. Now, when this came to Europe, that very book became a bestseller for hundreds of years, and Daniel Defoe basically copied the idea and wrote Robinson Crusoe later. And nowadays we learn basically Robinson Crusoe is the main work that we had to learn. That's absolutely not true. It goes back to Ibn Tufayl, as many things go back to the Muslims, especially from Al-Andalus. Many books and many works that we know nowadays that we keep reading in American or English literature, French literature. Rousseau claims to have redefined logic and reasoning, but again, the Muslims of that time, especially in Al-Andalus, had gone back to Platonic thought, had gone back to Aristotle, had gone back and had worked with their thoughts. And they didn't say, oh my God, so many bad things what they say, we have to get rid of them, burn their works. No, they took them, they translated and corrected them. And that's a massively big difference to the Christians, who actually what they did, as soon as they couldn't understand classical work, and as soon as it went against their understanding of the world and Christianity, they burned them on the stake. So there is a total opposite to the way that Muslims in general, of course, did and dealt with knowledge to the way the Christians, until nowadays, to be very honest. I mean, because we're living in secular states, the church, they're just quiet. They're doing what they're told to do, and otherwise they wouldn't exist anymore. Churches wouldn't have been able to develop in the way that they are nowadays. So especially in France, where you see that Catholic priests are basically walking barefoot because there is no money. They are getting paid by the Catholic Church, which lives on taxes on arms of people and not taxes. Like in Germany, for example, they clearly have two religions. I mean, Protestantism and Catholicism as their main religions, which get taxes from the state. So anybody living in Germany pays taxes directly to these both churches, whereas in France that's not the case.
Okay, subhanAllah. So, Dr. Steph, what we're seeing now, okay, a picture is starting to emerge. Christianity is basically cutting itself off, and by extension, the people that it governs, away from reason, away from rationality, away from other cultures and civilizations and thought generally, and which is resulting in a lot of agitation, a lot of rebellion. Because essentially, when you're turning away from reason, you're telling the human being not to exercise one of his or her most basic faculties, right? It's some God-given faculties. But at the same time, we're seeing Islam is encouraging all these things, right? Now we get to, say, the 18th century, or just prior to the 18th century, you have the French Revolution, you have the period of Enlightenment. What's happening in this period? Just give us a summary of that, please.
Okay, Bismillah. Okay, well, if you're talking about the 16th, 17th century, the development of something that you would not expect most probably now, coffee houses. Imagine now a very simple thing such as a coffee house or coffee in itself. I mean, you might say like, okay, it's true. Had the Ottomans not come, hadn't they brought coffee, we wouldn't have had coffee. So who cares? It's not just the coffee in itself, but it's the development out of what happened out of coffee. The first thing you do when you go to Vienna, and the first most important, I mean, Viennese and Austrian culture is praised for having the best coffee culture in the world. Now, this doesn't come out of nowhere. They didn't develop it themselves. It came from the Ottomans. And the Ottomans, of course, being at the gates of Vienna, they left the coffee behind, and they left the idea of coffee houses behind in Vienna. So from there, it spread throughout Europe. So in coffee houses, revolutionaries would actually meet. They would meet up in coffee houses. They would discuss the next revolution, or they would discuss the change of government or whatever else political issues would be discussed in there. So from coffee, development in coffee house developed into revolutionaries actually, and people who wanted to move away to free thought and free thinking, right? That's something that is extremely important for us to see. So 16th century, 17th century, moving towards the development of thought. Industrial revolution is coming. Industrial revolution starting in the UK, in Britain, as well as in Liège, in Belgium. These two countries are the ones that started the Industrial Revolution. These two countries also looked into how do we deal with technology, how do we deal with modern technology, and what can we do? How do we deal also with religion, which before already the French counterparts had actually already suppressed. Christianity was suppressed after the French Revolution. Priests were killed, priests were beheaded. Okay, and the idea was now move away from that. We want a nation. We want an independent, self-thinking, moving away from God nation. And nation became now the idea that exchanged the idea of Christianity was the ideology of nationalism. Suddenly we have nations developing in Europe which didn't exist before, never existed before. We have suddenly revolutions on the Balkan Peninsula against the Ottomans, the idea of Greeks, Serbs, Albanians, Bulgarians defining themselves as being a nation, meaning we want a country with Christianity, with our Christianity being the main religion, but as the French wanted, not as a religious state, but rather as an identity. Now, the Albanians were the only ones, the odd ones out, who were actually mainly Muslims. But again, they did not look into Islam as a state religion. As we know, later Albania became a communist country, and they totally dismissed Islam. They became an atheist country and a secular country, worse than France and Turkey, actually. So the move towards nationalism is the next move, because a human being has this urge to worship something. And if you don't worship a God, if you don't worship your creator, you start worshiping money, technology, nation, or whatever else. And we have come to the point now that religion of these states nowadays, of the West mainly, is nationalism. That is their religion. Secular is nationalism. And definitely a little bit now also mixed up with Christianity, because too many Muslims in France make it a problem. So we have to push some kind of religion against it. So let's push the cross against it. Let's push some kind of symbolism against it. Not religion is in itself, not Christianity, but Christian symbols have to come in there. So the cross is very important, but it's not because they believe in the cross, and not because that Isa alayhi salam, according to them, died on the cross, but because it's just a symbol of them being French Christians and not French Muslims. Okay, it's a symbol of being a German and not being a Muslim. So you are German, and the cross belongs to your identity, which is part of it. Not necessarily that we believe in it. I mean, Madonna, we all know Madonna, right? Madonna is full of crosses all over. But you want to tell me she's a believing Christian, right? I mean, we all, you know what I mean. So look at this, you know, it's a part of their identity. Wearing a cross, every Greek wears a cross. Every Greek man, you know, wears a cross. But that does not mean that they go to churches and believe in Christianity. Not at all. It's a kind of counter religion. It's more, Christianity has become the counter religion of Islam in Europe, mainly nowadays. So yeah, that's what's happening basically. So a development towards nationalism, and then the nations develop in the 18th and 19th century. We have a clear evolution for nationalism, independence. We have the nations as we have them nowadays in the last 200 years, basically.
Yes, and subhanAllah, so it's almost like they wanted to move away from the focus of an afterlife and focus on the dunya, on the worldly life, right?
100%. 100%. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, please.
No, 100 it's exactly. I mean, you put it. That's exactly put it right on the dot. I mean, on the point that again, because a human being needs to worship something, okay. And if I mean, in the world, in the capitalist society that we are living in, we have to worship money because everything is about money, right? If you don't have money, you can't move. You can't do anything. You can't. So money is a very important factor here, and worshiping money, I would say that the majority of people living in the West, in the capitalist society, would rather worship money than anything else. But what comes to it is also, of course, a kind of a source of identity. They need that too. They need to have an identity. I mean, money is good to have, right? You can buy a lot of things with it that so-called makes you happy. But then what also must make you happy, and you have to look into, is your identity. Who am I? Who are we? Now, knowing that, or thinking that we know that there is nothing after the hereafter, because obviously we don't believe in God anymore. There is nothing in the hereafter. The only life that we believe in is this life here. So we have 60, 70, 80, 100 years of our life on this planet. So let's make the best out of it, right? Let's enjoy ourselves. Let's buy whatever we can buy. Let's live for the nowadays. Let's live for the today, right? So there is no hereafter. So what I can do is make use of the money that I'm earning as much as possible. I'm getting that I'm working for. I'm killing myself to get as much as possible, to be able to buy a big house, to be able to buy a big car, to be able to go on holiday, and then I die. That's it. So let's not discuss dying, because dying, that makes me feel uncomfortable because I don't know what's coming. The only thing I want to talk about is the here, the now and here. Here, I'm living on this planet. I'm living here. And you know what? My mother keeps saying one thing when I talk about Islam and I talk about religion. Nobody has ever come back to tell me it is the way you tell me it is. You know, this is so trivial. It's so stupid, to be very honest. This kind of thought of nobody has ever come back. Even if you saw somebody, imagine now somebody dies and they come back from the death and say, I've come back. You wouldn't believe them, would you? So what is that? How can you say these things? How can you utter this nonsense? How can you say nobody has ever come back from the dead to come and tell me if it's really the way it is as you say it? So it is really pathetic that the thought of atheists and the thought of people of nowadays, who most of them, I would rather say they're agnostics than atheists, and I think this is something you had discussed already once, that I believe rather that we're moving to, that we are living in a stage of agnosticism rather than atheism, because any atheist in the end, when I have a discussion with them, they will come at the end, they will actually tell you one thing, they would admit one thing. They would rather admit that they're agnostics than atheists.
That's a very interesting observation, Dr. Steph, because you're right. It's like most people don't have the time to be a outblown atheist because they're too busy with the material world, right? So they rather be agnostic, and that does the job. But Dr. Steph, what's something you mentioned about identity, that human beings, when they're disconnected from their creator, they still need to worship something and still need to have identity. That's a very interesting point. Now, obviously in the 20th century and the late parts of the 19th century, you had now in the world a manifestation of this type of secular atheist mindset, which manifested in the form of, for example, the Soviet Union, and you had, you know, these people who were pushing communism and communism or capitalism. All of these ideologies are focused on the material, physical world. It's about gaining as much as you can of the material world, and to get people to focus on this goal, these people, especially such as in the Soviet Union, they went to great extents to disconnect the human being from its creator, right? So, for example, at the time of Lenin and Stalin, absolutely, you know, I mean, please share what sort of, if you can give us some insights into the type of things that took place to meet this objective and goal of making the most of the world, material world.
I mean, subhanAllah, I grew up during the time of the Cold War. And that was the time, I mean, if we look into the 1970s, 80s, up to the 90s, we know that basically the world was divided according to West and East. And the East meant that time the Soviet Union, the bloc, the communist bloc, Eastern Europe, that time was part of the Eastern Bloc states and was part of the communist countries. And the world was divided. Europe especially was clearly divided. There was the Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Germany, where I grew up, was divided into West and East Germany. And still, after 20, 25 years, they still haven't caught up yet. Still, East Germany is East Germany. Still, there are issues that they wouldn't share with you guys. They wouldn't tell you, like, hey, we have these kind of issues. But we know in Germany that the issues are very big. And the mindset of that time, you cannot just change it in 1 or 2 generations. You cannot just change it. I mean, you haven't changed the mindset of slavery in the Americas in the last 100 years. We still have, I mean, that's why we have Mr. Trump there being the president nowadays, and we have people like him supporting him. We cannot just ignore that. The mindset is still there. So, and somebody very wisely said once, slavery, the idea of slavery hasn't changed. It just, let me think of the exact, do you know the slogan? The idea, slavery hasn't, it hasn't stopped. It just has changed. The idea of slavery has changed. The idea of white supremacy has changed. It's still the same. There's still white supremacists out there, racists basically, who consider themselves being better because of the color of their skin or background to other people. And they call themselves nowadays white supremacists, which is actually the same like racist, the same thing. These people are still out there, and this mindset has never changed. So what happened that time in the Cold War, if you look at the division that was there clearly between East and West, telling us at school already, what are you going to do? How are you going to react? In case you hear the alarm going on, a specific alarm, because that means the Soviets attack us or East Germany comes and attacks us. That's how I grew up. I grew up at school like that. So we had this clear enemy on the other side, the clear enemy, Eastern Germany or Soviets or the communists. They are our enemy. This enemy has disappeared now. This enemy doesn't exist anymore because, I mean, who believes into communism in that type of communism anymore nowadays? I mean, even China has moved away. I mean, China has become the most capitalist country in the world, basically, with the Communist Party. But so if you look at that, things have changed in such a way that we have to look behind the scenes, and many things have still stayed the same. I mean, the mindset is there. The people of that time still believe that they are better than others, or still believe in a certain system which does not include God, because materialism is what we thrive on. Materialism is what we work for. This life is the only life I can see, and I know there is no other life. So this mindset hasn't changed. And I don't think it becomes better. I think it becomes worse. The only thing that can change is what we experience on a daily basis. If you go to YouTube, if you look around and you see how on a daily basis hundreds and thousands of people accept Islam, mashallah, this in itself is already amazing. This in itself shows that people are still, they have the need to worship, and they will worship the Creator, mashallah. And the only way to worship Him is obviously moving towards the way of Islam, alhamdulillah. So we see it, alhamdulillah. There is a move towards it. Don't forget that just some years ago, before September 11, come on, I mean, I was one of the only convert walking around Germany. I remember how I was so happy having met a German that time in the end 80s. I met a German brother. I was like, mashallah, a German Muslim, mashallah. It was like miracle. And nowadays I go to Germany and there's no mosque that doesn't have at least 10, 20 German Muslims. Here in the UK, mashallah, we know how many British brothers there are, British Muslims. Yeah, well, I mean, in the end, it will come to the point that it has to come, right? If you read Ibn Kathir, you will see actually that it will have to come to the end that Islam will be the winning deen, mashallah, in the end, inshallah.
And I want to get your thoughts on that a little bit more. So let's just quickly summarize what we've discussed so far. One of the few of the things that we've mentioned, or you've mentioned and clarified for us, is you had Christianity, you had the oppression of Christianity, whether that be ideological, intellectual, or physical. That led to a rebellion. The rebellion transpired into the Enlightenment, which meant that the world went from focusing from a Christian, quote unquote, Christian perspective of spirituality and God, which was very narrow and the incorrect way of looking at things, to a completely materialistic, worldly mindset, right? And what ended up happening, it seems like, is the world went out of balance. Humanity went out of balance because human beings, like you said, we're beings that are created to worship God and to have an identity, right? It's a part of our nature. It's a part of our fitrah. So we find ourselves today, Dr. Steph, in a world where people are looking for spirituality, meaning they're trying to find themselves. We find ourselves in a world, and subhanAllah, if you think about it from a material perspective, we live richer than kings of the past. We have amenities, yet there's something missing. It's empty. Yeah. And like you said, people are coming, those that actually take the time to study Islam and look into Islam are coming by the hordes into Islam because they see that Islam has that beautiful balance between reason, rationality, revelation, between this dunya and the akhirah. It has a perfect balance in all regards. But I want to quickly pick your brains on going back to history now. So we've seen what happened from the Christian perspective leading up to the Enlightenment. Go to the Muslim world now. Now we know that things weren't all rosy along the way. Obviously, they were to the point where at the end, the Muslim world now, as we find, is fragmented. It's all over. We have very little left of our the Muslim civilization was, etc. If anything, what happened and why did it happen? What lessons could we take from that going forward? Give us some thoughts on that.
Yeah, mashallah. Excellent. I mean, first of all, the summarizing was excellent. I mean, we should write it down. It's recorded, right? Hopefully you're recording this as well.
It's recorded.
Right?
Yeah, it's recorded, inshallah.
Mashallah. So you're going to put it up. Send me the link plus once you have it.
It's going to go up automatically onto YouTube as soon as it's we're done, inshallah.
Well, it's absolutely, I mean, the summary is excellent. Absolutely. I must say, I mean, that's exactly the way we have to look at it from my perspective, mashallah. Now, remind me of the question, please, again. Sorry,
so the question is that we saw the Christian side of things from the Muslim world. Obviously, things didn't go too well from our perspective either, right? What happened and what could we learn from that?
Bismillah, yeah. Okay, now, look, if you're talking about the 15th, 16th, 17th century, now on the one side, we mentioned before that the Ottomans are the ones, obviously, who take over the caliphate. They're the ones who come to southeastern Europe. They're the ones who establish the Khilafah. Now, that is one sort of truth is there, and it is an important empire that needs to be mentioned. But in the same time, where during the time of the Ottomans and the Ottoman Khilafah, 16th, 17th century, you have colonialism. Basically, you have the Portuguese being the first ones from the moment that the Muslims left and Portugal became a Catholic nation, as we know it nowadays, the first Catholic nation actually in the world, the first as identity, 100% Catholic nation. They couldn't move further into Europe because Spain was blocked, Europe was blocked by the Muslims, so they had to go further out towards the Americas and Africa, and was exactly what they did. So the Portuguese indeed then went out to the Americas, went out to Africa. Brazil is the biggest Portuguese-speaking country in the world now. Portugal has nothing to say. Everything that's important Portuguese-wise comes from Brazil. So has exchanged Portugal. So we see then the thrive of the Europeans wanting to go out to discover on the one hand, yes, no problem with that. But on the other hand, also to conquer. And that's now the right word to use, actually, because there were conquests that happened. And they go into the Muslim world, they go to Africa, they go to Asia, they go to the Americas, they conquer people. And it seems to be a European phenomenon that when Europeans deal with other people, who they conceive, who they think are lower than them, they need to somehow either exterminate them, get them to work for them, and in the end, they get exterminated, as it happened in the Americas. Basically, Native Americans were...
Dr. Steph, if I could quickly ask you a question on the colonization, the whole idea and the mindset. Sure. You said it's a European type of phenomenon. What drives it? Do you think it's a racial thing? Do you think it's something to do with the type of ideas and theories they had in regards to evolution, etc.? Do you think it's just a power trip thing which emerged from the Enlightenment? What was it? What do you think it was?
It's a wonderful question, because I've been thinking about something like that as well. But you have many points that you mentioned. I think personally, it's my personal opinion. Now, first of all, I believe we don't know when Allah created Adam, alayhi salam, and Shaitan was there and told him, listen, why do you create such a being? Basically, you have, I mean, there's no problem. We have us, you have the angels, you have me. What's the problem? And I'm paraphrasing, of course, now. I believe personally that Shaitan must have been white, European. I believe he must have been European. I'm so sorry, but subhanallah. And I'm saying that as a European, by the way, you know that I'm double European. I'm Greek and German, right? So as a European, I believe that this arrogance and this looking down on other nations and peoples, that is something that really is a trademark of European colonialism. And you can say, look, I mean, before European colonialism, you find other people having gone somewhere else. I mean, Australia had contact with Muslims from Indonesia long before Captain Cook, long before the British arrived in Australia and claimed it for themselves. I didn't see Indonesia. We don't know of any sources telling us that Indonesian Muslims claimed Australia for them, killed Aborigines in the country. They married Aboriginal women in the country. Muslim villages developed in the northern territories of nowadays Australia. We had Muslim villages that had developed there because of Muslims having contact with Australians Aborigines. And it's not that the Aborigines got rid of them in the country. Many of them accepted Islam, many didn't, but villages developed then, and there was a contact. There was a humane contact between Muslim Indonesians and Australian Aborigines. But from the moment that British people arrived in Australia, we know the outcome, right? I mean, I don't know many Aborigines nowadays in Australia anymore. We don't know. We know what happened in Australia, right? The same on the other side in the Americas. We see Malian people, Africans arrived in the Americas. They didn't claim, or North African people, Muslims arrived in the Americas. They didn't claim. They didn't put the flag of Islam there and said, now this is part of the Muslim world. We all Muslims, if you want it or not, otherwise we're going to kill you. In the country, it went under. We just discovering now that, because Europeans make us forget this, and they're hiding these sources because there were Muslims there in the Americas before. We know that now, but look how many centuries later. So I don't know. I think part of a European mindset, I mean, it might seem a little bit racist now what I'm going to say, but I believe that Europeans in general, as I know them, have a kind of supremacy feeling. They really believe that they're better than other peoples on this planet. And what helped them also, I mean, starting the slave trade, was the support of the church, telling them basically that black people had no soul. Do you know that it was discussed? It was discussed. First of all, women had no soul, according to the Catholic Church, right? Women in the Middle Ages, according to the Catholic Church, had no soul. Next to this one, then, when black people, of course, came across black people and had to justify that they needed other people to work for them on the plantations, then the Catholic Church had to invent, of course, the new fairy tale that black people have no soul and are inferior to white people. So they came up with the whole story in the Bible, basically, of Sam and Ham. I think you know the story that let me think carefully. The story was about Ham basically having seen his father naked, okay, which is a story in the Bible. And Ham is basically the ancestor of the Hamites. The Hamites are considered the African people, and the Sem, the ancestor of the Semites. So the Semites are the Arab and the Jewish who came later, Jewish people. So the Hamites, being black and Africans, are basically cursed for that sin because they saw their father naked. So this was just a justification for the slave trade. So it is just crazy if you think of that. So a good Christian had to be, at that time especially, a good racist, had to be a white supremacist in order to be able to be a good Christian. And black people were just there to work for you. Black people were just there basically to work on the plantations for you and give you everything that's good on this planet. So I really believe that there is a lot of racism in the Europeans, in the European mindset. I really believe that. On the other hand, of course, if I go back to ancient Greece, I mean, subhanAllah, to my home country, and if I look into Athens and the classical Athenian society, I know, and there are authentic sources telling us that there had been also black people living in Athenian society, free black people, and participating in society, in Athenian society, and even leaving things bare, such as Aesop, for example, as many people claim that Aesop came originally, the word Aesop, his name Aesop, comes originally from the word Aethiopas, Ethiopia. So he was most probably from the Horn of Africa, what is nowadays Ethiopia, because if we look at also what he left behind, the fables, the stories that he left us behind of talking animals, this is something that actually originates in Africa, comes from Africa. So it makes sense that Aesop was actually not white Greek or whatever Greeks are, but he was originally most probably an Ethiopian black person. So there you see again, and this is all hidden. This is something we come up nowadays. We find out things about that. We find out sources. So why is this all hidden? Why do we as Europeans have this feeling that we have to hide that there are other people who are as good, if not even better than us? So it's really a question that I throw back to you. I don't know. I cannot answer you this question or these questions. But I personally have the belief that, honestly, I think Shaitan must have been a European. So I don't... He must have been white. So Allah Alam, it's really, really bad, really bad.
Subhanallah. That's the first time I've heard that, but so it is subhanallah, it's very interesting, mashallah.
I would love to know the comments later, inshallah, when they come up.
Offline. I'll definitely be sharing that with Hamza as well and getting his thoughts on that. But Sheikh, okay, sorry for taking you off track a bit. So the Europeans are colonizing the Muslim lands, etc. Where do we go from this? So how did it all break down and fall apart?
Yes, subhanAllah. I mean, the Portuguese were the first ones, as we mentioned already. The Portuguese were the first ones as Europeans to go out. They even went as far as Indonesia, went to Asia. And what made them very upset was obviously that they, even on the other side of the world, they had to encounter Muslims again. So wherever they went, they found Muslims. Wherever they've been, many Portuguese colonies, Mozambique, for example, Mozambique, Mozambique, the very name itself indicates there was contact with Muslims. Mozambique itself has a big percentage of Muslims. Many parts of Africa, even Guinea-Bissau, which is Portuguese, has a majority of Muslims. So the Portuguese themselves came across Muslims. So they had to deal again with these people whom they got rid of. They just got rid of them in Portugal and in Spain, and now we have them over there. That happens in Africa, that happens mainly in Asia, and they after the Spaniards come, the British, the English come, the French come, and so on and so on. So the Muslim world is so weakened that they cannot deal against the invasion of the Europeans coming and claiming any piece of land that they could come across all over the world, basically. And the world is divided, first of all, amongst the Spanish and the Portuguese, and later amongst any kind of Europeans who went out. Even the Dutch, can you imagine? The Dutch and the Belgians. Even then, they claim to have colonies. I mean, the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which was part of Belgium once, is 10 times bigger than Belgium itself. So if you look at that, Holland had colonies in South America. South Africa was part of the Dutch Empire. Indonesia, the biggest Muslim country in the world, the largest with regards to population, was once part of Indonesia, was part of Holland. So they come across Muslims. So what they do basically now is suppressing. But Allah is not sleeping, ya akhi. Subhanallah. We know He doesn't take rest on a Sunday. So Allah is there. And what is happening now, an example to give you, I mean, where the plan of Allah comes in. The Dutch went to Indonesia, colonized Indonesia, suppressed the Indonesians. And the Indonesian Mashaykh, they proclaim a jihad against the Dutch. So they tell their people, listen, we have to revolt against these people. They are non-Muslims. They're suppressing our Sharia. They're suppressing us as Muslims. So the Dutch realized that we have to get rid of the Mashaykh. We have to get rid of the ulama. So what do? We send them to South Africa, to our other colony, which is basically a colony for prisoners. So let's send them down to South Africa. Let's put them in isolation. Put them in the desert. give them a house, put them a sheikh, all in different parts of South Africa, and let them basically stay there. What happens, ya subhanallah? These ulama coming from, these are learned scholars coming from Indonesia, stay in in isolation. Black people who are suppressed by whites go and find refuge in these houses, come across Muslims, accept Islam, and Islam spreads to South Africa because of these ulama coming from Indonesia. Allahu Akbar. What can you say? What can you say? So whatever they tried to do, it didn't work, and it doesn't work, you know.
Dr. Steph, it reminds me of a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, and I'm paraphrasing, where he says that there will come a time where people will be picking from a table like a round table. Yes. You know, and the companions asked why would this be the case, and the Prophet said, because you would have wahan, love for the dunya, you know, essentially. So I want to ask you this: what was the mindset, or what was the spiritual state from your reading of the Muslims when it all started to fall apart? And did that have a role to play? Because we've seen the external factors, but what about the internal factors? What was the issues there?
Well, the external factors, of course, influence the internal factors very strongly. I mean, if you look at Egypt, a strong country in the Arab world, when it became colonized, it itself became a colonizer. The Egyptians, with the Anglo-Egyptian army, went down to Sudan and colonized Sudan. I mean, the mindset you're asking now, subhanallah, the Muslims had become so weak that actually Islam was just, yeah, I happen to be Muslim because I'm Egyptian. I happen to be Muslim because I'm a Turk. I mean, we have it nowadays even, but nowadays we have counter narratives. But that time it was really like this, that you had basically the 19th, 20th century. You could basically, you could barely find, in the cities especially, the development of education, which was basically development of Western education. And Egypt is a very good example for it. Turkey is a very good example, where they established their European education system, the French, the British, the American way of education, where this education went into the mindset that you could barely see a woman in Cairo with hijab. In the 1940s, 50s, I want you to take a look at photos in Cairo. You think you're somewhere in Paris, or you think you're somewhere in London. Like, these people are Europeans. I haven't, if you look at 1940s, 50s, 60s photos of Cairo, you don't see women with hijab. You don't see women with hijab. Istanbul, you don't see women with hijab. Edirne, I remember the city of Edirne. I went to visit the city of Edirne, which is the third big Ottoman capital, once capital of the Ottoman Empire, exactly the border to Greece. This very city, I visited it first in the 1990s. Barely any woman with hijab. I visited it in the beginning of the 21st century. I saw much more. Nowadays, it's exactly as the rest of Turkey. You will see so many women with hijab. You will see the mosques full. You will see people coming back to Islam. And this is amazing. This is amazing. So the mindset at that time was they were so weak that they actually, you can clearly say there were many Muslims by name, born Muslims in the Muslim world, who actually didn't even consider themselves as Muslims. They didn't consider Islam as being part of Islam. Was something Friday maybe you go to for Jummah, and that's about it. As bad as the Christians on Sunday going to the church, basically. That's what has happened to them. This Christian atheism, this Christian secular idea has gone over to the Muslim world, and we have Muslims, we had Muslims, and we still have Muslims nowadays in certain countries. For them, Islam is really a Friday religion. You go for Jumu'ah, and furthermore, that's your Islam. It doesn't interfere into your daily life at all. You have nothing to do with it.
SubhanAllah. And do you think, Doctor, do you think there was prior to this, or prior to the colonization of the Muslim lands and the Muslim civilization disintegrating, do you think that not all of, but generally speaking, that the worldly life had gotten to the Muslims to an extent, and the Muslim civilization? Like, did the luxuries of the world affect them and turn them away from God to an extent, which may have also resulted in what occurred? Do you think there's an element of that as well?
Clearly very strong. I mean, you mentioned the hadith, which is very fitting here. I mean, you clearly very strongly. I mean, when we talk about education, which influences our next generation, this generation in education is being told the most important thing, that your gain in life is to make money. Your gain in life is to become a professor. Your gain in life is to become a big doctor or a lawyer. That is your gain in life. And you know yourself, Asian background in the UK. it is more important, if you look at Asian families, it's more important for an Asian father and mother to have their daughter becoming a lawyer or a doctor than their daughter wearing hijab and praying 5 times a day. Am I wrong there? I mean, this is a general problem, and I'm mentioning as an example, the big Asian population that we have in the UK. The same you can find anywhere else. Arabs, for example, you will find this amongst Arabs as well. There is no doubt about it that there are Arab parents who go crazy when their daughter starts wearing hijab suddenly. They go crazy. Imagine that, as bad as our people, my parents would have gone if they had seen me with hijab, had I been a woman, of course, or as they see my wife. They saw my wife, they go crazy about this one. They cannot accept that. They just simply cannot accept that. So, of course, the mindset changed through education and seeing that if you go through the Arab world, if you go to the Muslim world, and I had the chance to work for a school in the Emirates, for example, which was an English-based school, that British curriculum. That means that the means of education, the language was English, the curriculum was British. So Islam and the Arab world, there were Arabs who spoke better English and Arabic in the Emirates. In the Emirates. Now, this is absolutely crazy. It's crazy. You're living in your country, which is officially an Arab-speaking country, which is officially an Islamic country, and not only don't you know Islam, but you don't even speak the language of your mother and father. So it's not even a mother tongue anymore. Your mother tongue has become the language that came from outside and influences you. Language and education is extremely important. Language can decide how you think. The way you use language, it can decide how you think. It's impossible to learn the English language without having to learn some Shakespeare. It's important when you learn English as a language, you have to look into English literature, because a literature comes from the language. Language develops and language influences, of course, anything that comes out of there. So you cannot avoid being in contact with American literature, English literature, Australian literature. When you learn English, you have to. That's logical. So when you learn Arabic, you have to be automatically, it goes back to the Fusha, it goes back to the Quran, which is the source of the Arabic language, basically, which has kept the Arabic language as it still is, because nowhere in the Arab world you will find anybody speaking Fusha amongst themselves. They have their own dialect, and the Arabic language has become basically an isolated language, which we, foreign Muslims, learn in order to be able to learn the Quran. The Arabs who open the Quran and they don't understand what it says there. Although they might speak Arabic, they say, but they actually speak Egyptian, Lebanese, Moroccan, whatever. So that's what is happening. In brief, I mean, we can keep going on.
Yes, but what I found interesting was the like when you look at the way that when the Europeans went in and colonized different countries, they literally changed everything. They went into the education. They went into change the language. They changed the architecture as well. The architect, that's another discussion in itself. Like they changed everything to reshape the minds of people. But if you look at the way when Muslims took lands, that didn't really happen. They gave people the autonomy to continue to practice their own ways within a certain framework. Isn't that right, Doctor?
I always give the example of, and I think you must have heard me in the course also, when I mention Constantinople. I mean, when the Ottomans came to Constantinople, what we call nowadays Turkish architecture is nothing else but Byzantine Orthodox architecture. That's what Turkish architecture is, just a copy of Byzantine architecture. But that is not derogative. I don't mean it in such a way as the Greeks might say, because they say then, yeah, you see, they even had to copy. These Turks didn't even have culture. That's not true. The Ottomans were of Asian origin and came with Asian culture and understanding, and you will see it in Konya. If you go to certain cities and parts of Turkey nowadays, you will see the architecture is heavily influenced by Asian architecture, where the Seljuks were there before. So the Seljuks were clearly Asian people and influenced, and their architecture was Asian architecture. So the Ottomans following them, the next Turkic generation, the next Turkic people following them, just simply adjusted. And that's exactly what Islam is about. Islam and the Muslims of that time knew that instead of changing the whole structure of the city, which would be crazy, why would we do that? I mean, changing the face of the city. They even employed Byzantine architects to build mosques. And today, mashallah, we're talking about the Hagia Sophia. The Hagia Sophia is obviously the example of all the mosques. If you go to Istanbul, you see that you don't even see a difference among, you don't know if it's now Sultan Ahmed Mosque or is it Hagia Sophia or any other mosque. They all look alike, because they copied the architecture of the Byzantine. So Turkish architecture is Byzantine architecture. The same, for example, Africa. You go to West Africa, go to Mali, go to Mauritania, go to Ghana. You see mosques that look and fit nicely into their surrounding and their environment. Fitting mud architecture that fits to the surrounding. It's not some kind of ugly Gothic architecture taken from Paris and put it in Dhaka as they've done. You know, you have these dark, unfitting churches put in an environment where the sun shines 24 hours. I mean, where the sun, you know what I'm saying, where basically you have African climate. Suddenly you have this Gothic architecture somewhere in Cote d'Ivoire and Ivory Coast, and you're like, what is that? I mean, it's absolutely unfitting. And the thing is, nowadays we are accused as Muslims to do the same.
Yeah.
Truth is,
I was going to ask you about that in a second.
Truth is yes, nowadays, because we have lost, and we spoke about colonialism, we have lost our mindset towards Islam. We have our guest working grandparents and parents who came to these countries here. They came to Germany, they went to Britain and to France, coming from the Muslim world, establishing a Turkish-looking mosque in Cologne, and establishing a Turkish-looking mosque in Berlin, and a Pakistani-looking mosque in London and in Birmingham. That is wrong. I have said it so many times. That is not the way that our ancestors showed us how to deal with. We should have come over here, but the difference, of course, is we didn't come as well conquerors or as people above the people who came. We came actually as, you know, with an inferiority complex. Muslims came over to these countries going to the Masa. They came back to the Masa. So now, Masa, what are you telling me to do? Work from 9 to 5 in the factories? That's what I came here to do. I came to make some money, and back home, you know, buy my house or support my family or whatever. They didn't come for Islam. They didn't even have Islam, most of them. So you understand? So we have to look into the way that our ancestors dealt with that. And the Ottoman Empire is a good example. Again, in Africa is a good example. And anywhere else you will see the older Muslims before, who actually established empires, Mughal Empire. You see, they have adjusted to their surrounding and environment. So yes, that shows again how tolerant actually Islam is.
SubhanAllah. So it's almost like we've moved away from what Islam teaches us, and we've started to follow in the footsteps of the colonialists. That's what we've become like them.
Absolutely become like them. But we don't have the with the difference that we don't have the might and the power of that they had actually at that time. They were powerful, and they came with guns, and we came with advanced technology, and they came with superiority in that way. So we don't have that. Our parents and grandparents did not come. Muslims did not come from North Africa. They didn't come from Africa and from Asia into these countries, into Europe, to bring Islam. They actually came as guest worker under the guest working scheme, and they came to help their factories again. They came here to Europe to help European factories and to help the European economies again. So yeah, what can you say?
So Dr. Stef, you mentioned Hagia Sophia recently being returning into or becoming a mosque again. What's your take on it? I just want to get your thoughts on it, because I know there's been loads of conflicting views and ideas and opinions in regards to this. I'd love to get you to share your views on this as well, please.
Yeah, inshallah. Okay, look, just to keep it brief, I have written a statement actually on my website. Whoever wants can read the statement. But in general, I give you a general idea. There are 3 opinions that I can share. First of all, as a Greek, first of all, as a Muslim, actually. As a Muslim, I'm looking forward to my next ticket, to my next trip to go down to Istanbul again, inshallah. The very first thing I'm going to do is to pray my 2 rakahs in the Hagia Sophia. I can't wait for that. That's my take as a Muslim. Yeah, of course, I'm looking forward to being able to go to such a beautiful city, to go to such a beautiful masjid, to go and pray, and may even declare Allahu Akbar, say it in Greek. So maybe I'll do that. But as a historian, which is let's take this as a next step. As a historian, I would rather say, when it was a museum, I had the chance, which I did when I was there. I went to a museum, to a neutral space, and I had the chance as a museum to look at it from a very different perspective, from a historical perspective, which nowadays is still there. I mean, again, I think it's a good compromise that they have left certain things where the icons are there. They just cover them when the prayer is there. Their prayer place, not all of it's a prayer place, so there's still a lot of tourists to go in and everything. So that's amazing. But it is, from a historical perspective, as the building was there, it was there as a museum. It was there basically as bare as it could be. As a Greek, I understand the way that the Greeks look at that, because the big problem here is not the Europeans and not the, nobody cares. It's not a religious issue here. It's a Greek and Turkish issue. Okay. And the Greeks, and then of course the ones above them, the Russians now of course want to join because the might and power is rather there than the Greeks. What power do they have? They're themselves struggling with the economy at the moment. So the Greeks come up and tell you now, look how they disrespect our buildings, whereas we, and now it comes, whereas we have these Turks over here and have their mosques here, which is not true. Because they've destroyed most monuments in Greece are either destroyed or not even taken care of, or if they are there, nobody cares what they have. And I have them documented in a documentary that I've made actually myself with regards to the Islamic monuments in Greece. So as a Greek, I do understand that they have lost their pride again, because don't forget, they have lost it a second time now. They lost it in 1453 when the Byzantine Empire was attacked by Sultan Mehmed Fatih, entered Constantinople and prayed to Raqqa and made this Hagia Sophia on that day the main mosque, turned it from a cathedral into the main mosque of the Ottoman Empire. And now again, and then 1935, it was a kind of neutral space, kind of. So they accepted that, kind of. But now again, the reconquest comes back again. It's a kind of trauma. You have to understand the Greeks. It's a trauma that now again in 2020, we go back to 1453. It's a reminder of what happened in 1453. It's a trauma that has been haunting the Greek nation all this time. So I'm trying to look at it from a different perspective, but I'm not going to start crying about it, and I'm not going to start, praising Erdogan for that. He's a president of a secular state. Let's be honest, Turkey is a secular country, and as long as it's a secular country, as long as we don't see any things have improved, there's no doubt about it, and no doubt about it, it has become better. But it has to. There's a lot still to happen in Turkey, and the Turkish mindset. We have a lot of Turkish clear kuffar. They themselves call themselves actually non-Muslims. Enough Turkish people from the population, and it's assumed that it's around 20 to 25% Kemalists, people who support Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's changes that time of Turkey, would actually see Turkey rather being an atheist country than where it's moving to now. So they have to fight their own demons. Actually, there's big issues in Turkey. It's not that.
Yeah, SubhanAllah, I was because when I did a short video on this, just sharing some thoughts, because I personally I thought, okay, from one perspective it's beautiful. You have another place to pray. There's another place where Allah will be worshipped on the face of this earth. It's a beautiful thing. Historically, it has a significance. But my main thing was, if you look at it from a Dawah perspective, our primary objective is not to bring buildings back to life, but to bring hearts and souls back to life.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's what we need to focus on going forward.
Subhanallah, I think you're the first. Subhanallah, I'm sorry, Akhi. You're absolutely right. I have to really grab this now, because you know that I've missed in the whole discussion, and I've been in several platforms, the discussion of Muslims and Muslim scholars and Muslims all over the world being happy about this Hagia Sophia turning into a mosque, and praising the president of Turkey and Turkey itself and everything. You're absolutely right. Spot on. I mean, we don't need the building to turn to a mosque. We actually need the rest of the mosque, which are many of them in the close proximity of the Hagia Sophia. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque just 20 yards further down the road. We need them to be full in Fajr. And I want you to go, not only Fajr, I want you to go to Istanbul on Jumu'ah and see how many mosques in the Sultan Ahmed Square are full of worshippers. They are not. So I don't need Hagia Sophia to be turned into a mosque, as long as I don't have the worshippers to go and pray there. Because it's not, because the way it's turned from a Turkish perspective, and I'm totally against it because I didn't become Muslim for that. The Turkish perspective is rather a nationalistic Islamic perspective than an Islamic perspective. So in a way that you see Turks going in and waving their Turkish flags, I would never wave a Turkish flag. Because what do you mean by that? What are you saying by that? So are you saying now you're proud as a Turk? Is it now, has it become, with the Hagia Sophia becoming a mosque, has it now suddenly become a Turkish place of worship? No, it has become a mosque. Now, as long as you wave your Turkish flag and the Turkish flag above on top of the building, I'm sorry, but as a Greek, it really disturbs me, because as a Greek Muslim, not as a Greek Muslim. It disturbs me. It disturbs me because I didn't become Muslim to become a Turk, as the Greeks say. No, we have to be very clear there. I've become a Muslim, alhamdulillah, and Allah is above everything. So if I want to go and pray in this mosque, it should be available for me, Turk or not Turk, which of course is the case. But what I'm saying is I'm disturbed by Turkish flags. Because it's not a building for the Turks; it's a building for the Muslims.
Yeah, and I think this is a widespread issue, Sheikh. SubhanAllah, you see Pakistani mosque, Bengali mosque, Turkish mosque. It's like that's not what Islam teaches us. But again, like you mentioned and we've discussed, nationalism has bled itself into our systems, and it's something that we need to shake off because it's not a part of Islam. So, Sheikh, I want you to quickly, if you can, I know we've gone over our time and I know I'm holding you back now. I want you to do two things. But while Dr. Steph is doing this, brothers and sisters, if you have questions, I know you've asked already, but because we were in the discussion, I didn't have a chance to bring them up. Please repost your questions now and I'll ask you a couple of questions at the end. But as they're doing this, if you can just give advice to two groups of people quickly. Number one, to the non-Muslims or not yet Muslims, who may be looking into Islam, who may have woken up and realized, look, I exist in a world which is turned away from God. Materially, there's everything, but internally, spiritually, it's empty. They may have learned something from a historical perspective today as to how we've ended up in such a world. What would you advise those non-Muslims looking, searching? And also then secondly, advice to Muslims on how we can rebuild ourselves in such a world where there are so many material distractions so we can once again carry this light and share the truth with people.
Yeah, mashallah. With regards to the non-Muslims, first of all, very important, the non-Muslims have to understand that the biggest issue that they have, especially if I look back to my, Greeks or Italians or whatever, they always tell you, I have problems with my parents don't want to accept it and whatever. Yes, you will. That's our test. This is our test. Born Muslims have this kind of issue as well. Their parents don't want them to wear hijab or don't want them to pray even. Imagine that. So what about us? So this is a test that we have to go through. I mean, Allah says basically, do you really think that when you have turned to Islam, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, that there will be no tests for you? Of course, these are the tests. So that's one thing. Don't expect that everything will become smooth and nice and happiness will come to your life. Yes, inshallah, that you will calm down from the spiritual perspective. Yes, that you will find your way, inshallah, as a Muslim. You will have a direction, an identity, a real identity, a direction that really gives you a way that gives you direction. This is amazing. This is amazing. This is something, you have an aim in life, ya akhi. Subhanallah. Your aim is not getting money. Your aim is not buying the next Porsche. Your aim is not your biggest holiday, but your aim is to worship Allah and to be happy in this life as well. You have the right to be happy in this life. So if you realize that, subhanallah, nothing should keep you back. That is an advice I would give to non-Muslims who really, they have this problem with their parents or relatives or environment or whatever that keeps them back. With regards to the Muslims, well, with regards to the Muslims, subhanallah, let the Muslims come back to Islam, first of all. Many of them. I have daily conversations with Muslims, born Muslims, who don't even pray, who don't even make salah. You tell them, do you know what that means to make salah? Do you know that you will be judged? The very first things that Allah is going to judge you on is your salah. I wouldn't be able to live the way that many born Muslims live, not praying, not even considering Islam at all. Subhanallah, you're given gold. Gold is given to you and you just throw it away. And you choose to replace gold with stones, So, subhanallah, that's all I have to say. Think, ponder. Life is really a short period. We are a short period of time on the. You and I, what are we in the universe? Who am I at this moment? What are we? We are smaller than ants in the universe. We have nothing, absolutely nothing to say. Who are we? So don't think that you're something special, living 100 years. That's all you live, and this is top up maximum. So there is more to life than just the Porsche and whatever. So yeah, that's what I can say at the moment.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Steph. I'm going to just ask you a couple more questions that some of the guys have asked, and then we'll wrap up, inshallah. So there's two questions that I'm going to mix. Someone first asked for resources and books if they want to study the history, go into depth about what we've talked about, and also about your books. Some of the brothers and sisters have visited your website already, mashallah, and
Yeah, I see, mashallah.
and they want to so tell us a bit about general books and the books you have on offer as well for Muslims.
Yeah, mashallah. First of all, Jazakallah khair, whoever this is, just went on Dr. Steph's website. He's got textbooks on these topics. I ended up buying the bundle, mashallah. Jazakallah khair. Indeed, the bundle basically is a package of 4 books. Each one of them has a DVD. I know nowadays, because of the issue of many people not having DVD players, what we're doing basically, the 3 Ottoman books, 3 out of 4 are focused on the Ottoman Empire, whereas the other one is a newer textbook which is focusing on everything, Islam in Europe basically as a whole. So this Islam in Europe goes into Al-Andalus, goes into the Ottoman Empire, into the Tatars, into the Vikings, and so on and so on. So we mentioned all this, what we mentioned, the British Isles and so on. So this specific textbook is at this moment taught at several schools here in Birmingham, and inshallah one is opening in London to us, inshallah. So this is a package basically which you will also get a link, not a DVD with this one, a link when you buy the bundle, which will be sent to you, and you can open the link, and it's a DVD set of at least 2 DVDs, which are minimum 2 hours or 3 hours long. MashaAllah. So I think there's a lot of information in there, many detailed things that you normally cannot find with regards to Islam in Europe, with regards to how Islam has come and settled in Europe. The Ottoman Empire, as I said, the 3 books are specifically about the Ottoman Empire, and that's a little bit more a niche market, whoever wants to know more. But at this moment, because of the whole issue of the Hagia Sophia, I think it's a very interesting topic to clear. With regards to online courses, we started with online courses last month, actually, and we started with Islam in Europe again as the main online course that we started offering last month in German, some weeks ago in English as well. So it's available under courses. And very soon, inshallah, within the upcoming 2 weeks, most probably, we will also offer The Rise of the Ottoman Empire, which is a mini-series of 6 episodes. The others are 12 to 14 episodes. This one, the mini-series of the Ottoman Empire, goes back to Ertugrul, which everybody knows nowadays, Ertugrul, up to Sultan Suleiman. So that's a mini-series which we have on offer in 2 weeks, inshallah. But at this moment, Islam in Europe is also with an EAT offer, basically. Instead of 99 euros, you can get it for 59 euros now, inshallah. I see a question. Shall I report?
Yes. So this question, Dr. Steph, is there's 2 questions which are similar again about the future of Islam. One was to do with what's the prognosis, or what's the, there's some predictions that Europe will be Muslim in 2050, and this particular question here about what's your thoughts on that, and the future of the Muslim world. What does it look like generally to you? What direction are we going in? What do we need to do to ensure that we head in the right direction, etc.?
Bismillah. Yeah. Look, the book that I mentioned before by Ibn Kathir, what is it called? The translation in English, I don't remember. Do you know which one I mean?
Which book? The history?
The last days.
The end of time. The end of time.
It is from the end of times, but a specific one with regards to the Dajjal coming back and so on. So this specific book goes actually deeper into what we have to expect from the future. So going into the issue of the Dajjal coming back, the issue of Isa alayhi salam coming back, that is something that if you want to know into details what expects us now in the far future, hopefully. At this moment, the near future, inshallah, I see that, first of all, I see the next generation Muslims waking up, even in Turkey. And believe me, I know Turkey from 20, 30 years ago. I know how secular they were, and I know how secular-minded these people were 20, 30 years ago. It has changed drastically, and I'm very happy to see that also politics in Turkey is changing drastically and becoming more Islamic, and the Muslims are clearly distinguishing themselves from the secular-minded and non-Muslims actually in that country. The same is happening in the Arab world, in many parts of the Arab world, not everywhere, but in many parts of the Arab world. And I think many people, especially the new generation, goes back to Islam. So I am quite optimistic with regards to the Muslims coming back to the deen. Born Muslims, for example, realizing what the deen actually is about. I'm kind of optimistic. On the other hand, also, of course, I expect, because of that, I expect also, of course, more attacks and more working against it, because that's not what the other side wants, and that's not what the system that's developing wants. The system is there to fight Islam and to fight the Islamic system because it goes against their ideology. And there are two ideologies, basically. Islam countering the ideology of consumerism, of capitalism, of the way that we're living nowadays, the materialistic world. So these are two opposing views. And this, I think, will become stronger, unfortunately, in a way that I don't know if I can say if we expect wars or something with this regards in the near future. But I think there will be more problems coming towards us as Muslims trying to really protect ourselves and our deen and our families. So this is on the other hand. So again, positive on the one hand, I see that many youngsters come back to the deen. MashaAllah, there is an awakening. There is something happening throughout the Muslim world and in Europe as well. But on the other hand, of course, you cannot expect the other side to sit still and wait it out. They're not going to wait it out. They are fighting. So Allah alam, really.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see that, subhanAllah, like you said, there's so many people that starting to practice again, Muslims returning to the deen. You've got non-Muslims who are actually really sitting down and inquiring about life and looking into the deeper questions of life and finding Islam and finding the truth of Islam and how natural it is and how in line it is with human fitrah, the human nature. So there is this, subhanAllah, people are coming to the truth. And it's interesting because the world that was designed to move people away from God is now becoming the world which is becoming a catalyst for people to move back to God.
Yeah,
because it's just so against human nature.
Absolutely.
So a lot of this stuff. So it's very interesting from that perspective. Dr. Steph, you had something on something I want you to touch upon quickly, and something someone mentioned is that you make history very easy to understand and palatable. Mashallah, may Allah preserve you. But something you mentioned to me the other day as well, which is it's not about dates, it's about understanding history in a way where it can impact your life today. Please give us some more on that, because I think that was very profound what you said there.
Yeah, we are used to that system, going to school and having to learn some dates by heart and putting them down on the exam paper, or learning some battles maybe. But there is never a connection. There is never anything drawn to nowadays. So when I learned something about the Battle of Hastings, which is a typical thing that you learn in the British Isles, of course, what is the connection to nowadays? So I learned about the Battle of Hastings. Now, nice. Okay, we know it. We put it down on the exam paper. We passed the exam. That's excellent. But what have I really learned out of? What is the lesson that I take of the Battle of Hastings? What is the lesson that I take of 1453? And I think I mentioned it before. An example: Sultan Mehmed Fatih, when he entered Constantinople. That was in 1453. Good to know the date. Fine and nice. But now more important is what happened. What did he do when he entered Constantinople? The first thing he did was he entered the Hagia Sophia and prayed 2 rakah. That was a Muslim leader. He didn't say, let's loot and let's kill and rape all the women and let's make them all, enslave them all, and let's make them all Muslims. That's not what he did. That was not on his mind. The first thing that he did was he turned towards his Rabb, towards Allah, and he made 2 rakah. He didn't have to. He was the conqueror. That time he had conquered the ultimate city. The city that every Muslim before him had tried to conquer but couldn't. So the first thing, he was a humble man, mashallah. And this is something we have to see too. So we have to learn from that as well. Being humble is not a weakness, but a strength. And this is something we see nowadays with our leaders in the current world. We have leaders in the world, especially superpowers are led by certain people nowadays who consider being humble and kind rather a weakness than a strength. So I think this is one part. So we have to indeed, as you said, it's not about dates, 1453, 711, 792. We're not, that's great. But these dates, these battles, these incidents and events that happened, we have to reflect upon them and take a lesson out of them of nowadays, because indeed history repeats itself. Wanting it or not, that might be something. I had a big discussion last time I was at Sheikh Haydam's place. And we had a big discussion, mashallah, about this specific motto, this specific slogan. Does history repeat itself? And indeed, history repeats itself. But unfortunately, what repeats itself is not the good things of history, but the bad things of history repeat themselves. The mistakes that people made are repeated nowadays. And this is what we have to learn and try to avoid. The mistakes that were made in the past should not be made nowadays. On an individual basis, I don't think I'm naive enough, or I'm naive to believe that nowadays that whole nations will learn. No, nations will not learn. Again, that's why history repeats itself. But on an individual basis, you and I, we can make a difference for ourselves, for our families, and we can make changes in our lives. Nations is a different issue, or whole big generations, that's a different issue. But ourselves, me, you and I, we can learn and should learn from our past history.
Yes, subhanAllah. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Steph. Before we let you go, please, because I'm sure everyone's going to be interested, where can they find more of your stuff? Where are you available online? Do you have a YouTube page? Do you have social media accounts? Please also share them with me in text so I can add them to the underneath this video as well, inshallah. So please tell us where they can find you, inshallah.
The most important one is the website that you can see, I think now, Dr. Steph Keris, StefKeris.com, basically.
Yep.
That's StefKeris.com. On the website, you will have a link also to the courses. Simply click on courses. The website is a German and English website, but it comes up in English. So for you guys, no problem. You just go there straight away. StefKeris.com. The courses are there. In the shop, obviously, are my documentaries that I've also made, by the way. A very nice one. The last one was the one in Italy. So I've been to Italy and made a documentary in Italy about Islam there. So just for you to know, because they keep asking me the same question. These are the DVDs that I sell, are links, digital DVDs, which you will be sent as a link, and you will all be able to open the link. So you don't need to have a DVD player. And these are documentaries, not talks or lectures. So real life documentaries on the spot. I've paid a lot of money to get them done. And I had cameramen who come with me, professional cameramen, who basically produced these documentaries. So they're on the level, I dare saying that they're on the level as many other documentaries that you can find on Netflix and on other providers or on TV, that I think we should have as Muslims to really look back and to understand our history better, to see actually on location. We have tried to make produce as many videos on location as we could. So StefKeris.com, courses, website is there. Of course, I'm on Facebook. You can find me under my name. Twitter, I'm not that busy with Twitter, to be very honest, but Facebook and YouTube channel, yes, I do have my YouTube channel. So all this stuff, again, you will find through my website, inshallah.
MashaAllah. Yes.
Yeah. No, whoever has some more questions can just simply email me on info@stefkeris.com. That is my website.
Brilliant. It'll be brilliant to get you on again, because there's loads of other topics, some suggestions that people were making today earlier as well that we can go into, such as I would love to do something on the tolerance of Islam with you, the spread of Islam throughout history, because there's loads of misconceptions about these things out there. So it'd be brilliant to get you back on at some point and just do that based on your availability, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Steph. Any last things you want to say before we wrap up?
SubhanAllah, I want to actually, I haven't even realized it's already 7 o'clock. I haven't realized how the time just passed. So I wanted to thank you and the audience for being here and listen to us. It's 1.5 hours that you have now spent, and I hope that we have given you enough for this time to take with you, ponder, and think about everything, and reflect actually on maybe your daily life. Think about it, because I think history can impact your life heavily. And if you learn from history, then this is the only thing. Then we have reached our aim. If we've really got people who are now listening to us, who see us to learn from either the courses or the books or whatever else they have learned even of this 1.5 hours. So Jazakumullah khair to everyone who has listened to me, and I hope we'll meet again, inshallah. Definitely, inshallah. Yes.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you. Assalamu alaikum.